Good morning, welcome back. Today is June 19th, Father's Day, so happy Father's Day to the fathers who are watching. And it's extremely hot out here on the deck today. I know what you're asking, how hot is it? Well, it is this hot. But in fact, it's so hot that that's why I'm not touching the desk or the table or anything out here. But I only want to talk about one event on this day, because it was on this date in 1865 that General Order Number 3 was read in Texas. Now, General Order Number 3 was the order to the southern states, to the enslaved people in the southern states, that slavery was over. In fact, I'll just read you the pertinent part of it. This is from General Order Number 3. This is the actual wording. The people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. And that was proclaimed on Texas, and that was the last state. So it was proclaimed, it was proclaimed through every state in the Confederacy, and Texas was the last one, and it was read on this date, June 19th, 1865. Of course, the war had ended in April of 1865. And it took, 4 months for the word to get to Texas. This day, as early as 1866, the very next year, people were celebrating this. African Americans were celebrating this. It's been called Black Independence Day. It's been called Freedom Day, Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, or more commonly, it's known as Juneteenth. And in fact, as of June 17th of 2021, President Biden signed a law creating the Juneteenth National Independence Day. So this is Juneteenth today. So happy Juneteenth. It is a federal holiday, so there's not going to be any mail tomorrow, I guess. But just as a side note, this is a holiday that we, as in the Christian community, especially in the white Christian community, should really get behind. Okay, I'm not saying, go all out or go nuts on it, but let's not be disparaging it. Let's celebrate it and honor it for the important day that it is. So I wish you all a happy Father's Day and a happy Juneteenth. And with that, we're going to get back to talking about Luke. And I believe today we're in Luke chapter 19. So let's get back to talking about that. Welcome back to our study on Luke. Today we're getting into Luke chapter 19, a chapter that has a couple of very well-known stories in it, but I think we're going to have a good discussion today, kind of going through some of the details and seeing different ways that people have looked at these over the years. Okay, so previously we had mentioned that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, okay, and he's heading toward that Passion Week, the death, the burial, the resurrection. The disciples and the crowd following him are expecting Jesus to claim his kingdom. They kind of think that that's what's going to happen. And Jesus knows that just the opposite is going to happen at this point, that he's going to be arrested, he's going to be tried, convicted, killed, buried, and then rise again on the third day. Okay, two very different visions of what's about to happen, okay? And as we mentioned at the end of chapter 18, beginning in the second thing we talked about in chapter 18 was the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And it's kind of interesting. I just want to remind you of that. So just previously, Jesus had told a story about this tax collector who was a good guy. Okay? He was the guy that wouldn't beat his chest and wouldn't come close, as opposed to the Pharisee. Okay, so that was at 18, and then Jesus had just healed a blind beggar's sight at the end of chapter 18. And in chapter 19, we get into the story of Zaccheus, the tax collector. Zaccheus, yes, Zaccheus, that's Zaccheus. Those of us who have been in any kind of a small children's church at any point know the song about Zaccheus, wee little man, it was he, etc., 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 okay? But let's talk about that. Beginning with verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Now, Jericho is an interesting town. Perhaps you remember Jericho as being the place that the children of Israel got as soon as they crossed the Jordan, and they in the book of Judges, the book of Joshua, where they circle it 7 times and blow the trumpets and the walls fall down. That's Jericho. That's the town where Rahab is from. It's also, we've heard of Jericho before in Luke, because in Luke chapter 10, when we have the story of the Good Samaritan, the man who was robbed was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. And now what Jesus is actually going to do is he's going to reverse that route. He's going to go from Jericho to Jerusalem, okay? But Jericho is the town that he's in, okay? It's relatively close to Jerusalem, okay? Not maybe, I think it's something like 7 miles or something like that, okay? So it's relatively close to Jerusalem, okay? So he's getting into the neighborhood, okay? A man was there by the name of Zaccheus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Okay, so right away we know a couple of things about Zaccheus. Okay, first of all, he's an important guy. Okay, he's a tax collector. Okay, he's a chief tax collector. And so, if you remember, at least one of the persons in Jesus, one of the 12 disciples, I should say, was a tax collector, Levi. So it's very possible that Levi knows who Zaccheus is, okay? And we know that Zaccheus is wealthy, okay? Now, immediately, most people will look at that and say, Zaccheus is wealthy because he's a tax collector. Tax collectors get their money by being cheats, so therefore Zaccheus is a cheat. Okay, that's kind of an assumption that is just baked into centuries of interpretation of this particular parable or this particular event, okay? I want to kind of set that aside for a moment. Okay, Jesus is just saying Zaccheus is there. He's a chief tax collector. He's an important person within that universe, and he's wealthy. Okay. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Remember, we said earlier that Jesus was traveling with a crowd at this point, so it's not difficult to see where he was. Could kind of look down, oh, see that cloud of dust? That's Jesus coming. He's coming here. And so Zaccheus, being a short guy and being relatively resourceful, says, listen, I'm going to climb into this tree just so I can get a look at the guy. Okay, I just want to get a look at the guy. That's all he just wants to see what he looks like. Okay. Now, there's no indication one way or another what level of religiosity at this point that Zaccheus has. Okay. All we know is he wants to see him, and so he climbs him into the sycamore tree. Now, a sycamore tree, now I'm going to put in a picture here of an American sycamore tree there, and you can see that some sycamore trees have a lot of branches kind of going out, big branches from low to the ground, so that a person could easily climb up and get up above the crowd to see Jesus coming in. Okay. Now, coming into town, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zaccheus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now, this is kind of interesting. Now, you have to ask yourself, how does Jesus know who's in the tree? Well, first of all, I'm guessing it was not a normal thing to see a person in a tree. Okay? So Jesus is walking along, and he looks up, and there's a guy in a tree. Okay? Now, Zaccheus may have been short, but once you get up in a tree, you're pretty obvious that there's a guy in a tree. Now, maybe, just speculation, well, let me ask you, how does he know? So he sees the guy, and how does Jesus know that that's Zaccheus? How does he know anything about him? Well, one obvious answer is Jesus is all-knowing, and he just knew that that's who he was. Okay, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer. My personal opinion is, at least in terms of approaching events in Scripture, is that if the text itself doesn't say a miracle takes place, or took place, or anything miraculous took place, I don't want to ascribe a miracle there. Okay? Now, it doesn't say how he knew, but walking into town, he sees a man in a tree. He's got a tax collector in his midst. Levi could have walked up to him or been walking next to him and said, oh, look, that's Zaccheus. He's like the chief tax collector. Okay? That's a possibility. Okay? Or just anybody in the crowd. Jesus could have been walking up and saying, yeah, there's a guy in a tree. And people, oh, that's Zaccheus. That's Zaccheus. That's Zaccheus. Now, I think Jesus knows about Zaccheus. Once he says, oh, that's Zaccheus, Jesus, being God, knows who Zaccheus is and knows what his spiritual condition is. Because what happens next is kind of interesting.
When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zaccheus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Okay. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he is gone to be the guest of a sinner. Okay, now this is not the first time that Jesus has had this accusation thrown at him. Okay. And of course, the people see Zaccheus. They see him as being like the chief sinner, being the chief tax collector, or a chief tax collector. All right. So again, we talked about the fact that tax collectors had this bad rap. Okay. Although every time Jesus comes into contact with a tax collector in Luke, it's always good. And again, we mentioned in Luke chapter 18, just the previous chapter, Jesus gives this great example of a tax collector who went home justified rather than the Pharisee. Okay, so Jesus' interaction with tax collectors have been very good. All right, so perhaps once Jesus said, oh, that's Zaccheus, he knows about Zaccheus, he knows what kind of a guy he is. And Zaccheus comes down and welcomes him warmly. So Zaccheus wasn't expecting this, but here, once again, Jesus is going to have a meal at a person's house. All the people saw this and began to mutter. The word there, to mutter, that's the Greek version of the Hebrew word that's used to talk about the children of Israel in the desert when they were muttering about having nothing but manna and wanting something different. It's the Greek translation of the Hebrew word there, and it's translated here muttered. But again, it's an old thing that's thrown at Jesus here. But verse 8. But Zaccheus stood up and said to the Lord. Okay, so now the invitation has been made, and everybody's like, he's going to go to the house. Now, but Zaccheus now suddenly is in the center of attention. Okay, so now everybody's watching what Zaccheus is about to say. Now, I'm guessing Zaccheus, being both a short person and being a chief tax collector, is not someone who often gets to be the center of attention, where everybody is paying attention to what he has to say. But now, because he's with Jesus, he has the opportunity to say something. Okay, and what he says here in verse 8, but Zaccheus stood up and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. Okay, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Wow, this is great. Okay, first of all, Zaccheus, we already know he's wealthy, and Zaccheus is going to give away half of his wealth to the poor. Okay, this is fabulous, right? So this is certainly a good thing. Now, it's interesting that, as I understand it, and again, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm told that the way it's phrased could be translated that Zaccheus is telling Jesus what he has already done, or what he is in the process of doing. Okay, which is to say, Jesus, I want you to know, I give half my income to the poor. I give half my wealth to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody, I'll pay them back 4 times whatever I've cheated them. Okay. Now, the interesting thing here, and this is what I find intriguing. Okay, the numbers don't add up, and what I mean by that is this: if Zaccheus is a cheat, and if Zaccheus got all of his money, all of his wealth through cheating people on tax collectors, there is no way he could repay everybody 4 times. Okay, there is just no way that he's going to get that kind of a return. Okay, on his money. Okay, so this is a kind of statement it's legitimate. Okay, and he's like, maybe there is somebody, but this is the kind of statement that somebody wouldn't make unless they knew they weren't going to have to do this. Okay, so for example, it would be similar to not exactly similar, but if I were to make a statement and say, listen, if I have cheated anybody in a horse trade, I will pay them the difference times 4. Okay, well, I personally have never traded horses, so it doesn't mean anything. Okay, or if I say maybe in the car business or something, if I truly believe that all of I've sold cars. Okay, I was in the car business. I was on the manufacturing side. or the finance side. I wasn't in the dealership. But even still, if you say if I truly believe that all of my work is above board and ethical, then it's like, okay, great, all right. And I think the point that Zaccheus is making, now that he has an opportunity to publicly present himself to the people, is to say, look, I'm a good guy. I'm like the Pharisee in the tax collector in chapter 18. Okay, I'm a good guy. I'm a righteous guy, even though I'm a tax collector. Okay, which is an interesting thought, because here, this is another one of those situations where, politically speaking, Zaccheus was on the opposite end of the spectrum. Okay, so you've got Pharisees, you've got Jews who don't like anything to do with Rome, and you've got Zaccheus, who is obviously connected to Rome in terms of livelihood, if nothing else, is saying, wait a minute, I'm a good guy. I'm a good guy. And so it kind of suggests that this is kind of the effect of the gospel, that it can bring these groups together, these disparate groups together, groups that typically wouldn't have anything to do with each other, but yet because of Christ, they can get together. Okay? Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. Okay? So now this statement makes me think that when Jesus is saying salvation has come to this house, now usually when we look at this, we think, okay, when Zacchaeus sees Jesus, he comes down, and somewhere in the greeted him warmly, salvation occurs. Okay? And again, I can't get any more specific than that, because we don't have a point in the text to really nail it down to. But somewhere in that moment, Zacchaeus becomes a believer. And when Jesus says salvation has come to this house, what he's saying is that, prior, this one was doomed to perdition, and now he is going to be with Jesus in paradise. That's salvation. He is now a saved individual. Okay? Then he points out that this man is a son of Abraham, because this man too is a son of Abraham. So I think salvation could be looked at a different way here. Okay, so a couple of different things could be going on at the same time. Okay, it could very well be true that Zacchaeus became a believer at that moment, and that's great. Okay, but that kind of makes you wonder, why does Jesus point out that this guy is a son of Abraham, that this guy is a Jew? Okay, that makes me think that perhaps this whole event, this whole public statement, is to reinstate, to restore Zacchaeus back to his society, back into his people. So is salvation of his reputation, the saving of his place in society, whereas he was an outcast beforehand. The presence of Jesus allows this man to get back into his own society. Okay, now this could have gone along as well as the salvation, in addition to. I guess the real point is that there's more to this event than simply a short guy getting saved. Okay, and I mean no disrespect to short guys, okay, but that's what the text calls them. Okay, so there's more to this particular event. Okay, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Okay, now that makes me think there's a salvation element to it, but you could also say that lost has larger connotations than simply somebody who is not a believer. Okay, somebody who has lost their way. Okay, somebody who had been a Jew and got caught up in the Roman lifestyle, suddenly Jesus has restored that person. And I think there's a lesson here that beyond simply, that the gospel has the power to go beyond simply saving you. It certainly has that, to guarantee that if you die tonight, you'll go to heaven. But it also, there's the power of the gospel to restore people to society, to restore relationships, to bring somebody who was an outcast back into the Jewish fold. And I think that is going on along with just the whole salvation thing as far as Zacchaeus goes. Okay, now this is going on. Now, again, at this point, we could be at Zacchaeus' house, or we could be still in public. While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable, because he was near Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. Now remember, I had just said at the start of our today's discussion that the people coming in think that Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem and claim his kingdom. Okay, and Jesus wants to manage expectations here. Okay, and so we've got Luke framing this discussion. Okay, what Jesus is about to say is being said to those who think that once they get to Jerusalem, there's going to be this big kingdom uprising and Jesus is going to take over. Okay, so that's That's the framing. That's the context. That's the moment when Jesus is about to tell this story. Now, this story that he's about to tell, this parable that he's about to tell, is well known. It's one variation of the parable of the talents. So there's two stories, and they're two different times he's told this. Okay, but some of it is pretty much the same. But this one I think is kind of interesting. Okay, the other one is in Matthew chapter 19, I think it is. No, Matthew 24, 20, I don't know, it's Matthew. So here's what happens, okay? He said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then return. Okay, so now this would not have been unusual to those who are listening, okay? Because they are in Jerusalem, they are in Israel, and Israel is under the protection, control, domination of Rome. And to become the ruler, the local king, it was not unusual for people to go to Rome and be blessed. That's what Herod the Great had done. That's what his son Herod Archelaus had done. Okay, so this had happened. So they recognized this. So we look at it and think, right, that's kind of weird. Don't you just stay there? It's like, no, this is not unusual given the location and the time. Okay, so there's a land, there's a nobleman who's going to become king. Okay, wants to become king, so he's going to go to the far country. In this case, go to Rome to get the blessing, get the crown, whatever, to come back and be the king of this particular country. Pointing then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. Put this money to work, he said, until I came back. Okay, so he calls 10 servants and gives them 10 minas. Now, a mina is a unit of money. Okay, and it's basically. It's basically 3 months' wages. Excuse me. Let's just leave it there. It's 3 months' wages. In contemporary amounts, it's about $15,000. Okay, and this is 2022, so it's about $15,000. So he leaves with these 10 servants basically $150,000. Okay. Now we kind of assume, we don't know this for a fact, but we kind of assume that it goes one to each one. Each one gets $15,000, and he says, "Go out there and make it, do something with it." Okay. So that's what happens. Now, 14. There's a little thought here. It says, "But his subjects hated him." Now, not the servants who just got $15,000 apiece, but the subjects hated this nobleman. They don't want him to be king. And sent a delegation after him to say, "We don't want this man to be king." He was made king, however, and returned home. Okay. Now, again, not unusual. There was a delegation sent after Herod in 40 BC. There was a delegation sent after Archelaus in 4 BC, and the same thing happened. They went, no dice. Herod becomes king, is given to king. Archelaus is given to king. Now, with Archelaus, who is 4 BC. He was given a slightly smaller, it was kind of managed a little bit, so there was some benefit to it. But this would have been something that they would have understood. As far as, okay, yeah, you go and you complain. It's like a court or something, okay? So he was made king and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had done with it, okay? The first one came and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. Okay, so in other words, "Sir, this $15,000 that you gave me before you left, it's now worth $150,000. Here." Okay. "Well done, my good servant," his master replied, "because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter. Take charge of 10 cities. Okay. Now, a couple thoughts here. That is a huge rate of return. Okay. He went from 1 mina to 10 minas. That is a 1,000% return. That is an outrageously good return. Right now, if you were to get a 5% return on income, you would be like, people would be falling over their feet to give you their money to manage. If you could get a 5% return. Okay, this is a 1,000% return. Okay, he gets this. And what happens is he gets 10 cities to rule. So now this slave who had been just a financial manager is rewarded. Good work is rewarded with more work, is now given 10 cities to rule. So he becomes kind of like a assistant king or a vice king, I don't know what you call him, a duke or something like that. Okay, so he gets this reward. Okay, because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. Now, if you remember back in Luke 16 when we talked about the shrewd manager, in Luke chapter 16 verse 10, 16 verse 10, not 17. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. Okay, so again, one of the things that is said to the shrewd manager by the rich man in that passage is, hey, because you did well with this small amount, I'm going to give you a bigger amount. Okay. Let's see. First one came back. Verse 18. The second one came back and said, Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. Okay, now this is a 500% return. Again, still an outrageously good return. Okay. Return, again, this is very, very good. His master answered, you take charge of the 5 cities. Okay. Now, apparently 6 other servants are overlooked. Okay, because again, at first there were 10 servants. Now we're only going to talk about 3. So now we're going to talk about the third servant. Again, what these other 6, we don't know what happened to that. Okay. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it and laid it away in a piece of cloth. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. Okay. Now, on the one hand, a very similar description is given earlier in Luke of Jesus' ministry. Okay. However, really when it comes right down to it, this is not a very flattering description of the nobleman. Okay, this is not a very, he says, you're a hard man. You basically, it's like you take what's not yours. Where to go here? You take what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. Okay, so, this is why there's a delegation going after him to not want this guy to be the king, because this guy is an exploiter. He's a hard man here, so there's reason not to like him. Okay. His master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I do not sow? Why then didn't you put my money on deposit so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest? Okay. So really what happens is, he's saying, listen, the minimum you could have done is taken my money and put it in the bank. That's the minimum you could have done. So really what happens is this ruler, this nobleman who is now the king, has actually lost. Okay, it's kind of getting into the financial future value of money and all that kind of stuff. But the money, the one mina he had that he was given could have been, so $15,000 could have been $15,100 if he put it in for interest. And so the rich man, the nobleman, actually loses money as a result of this guy's actions. Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Okay, so take this 15,000 and give it over to the first guy. Sir, they said, he already has 10. Now, who are they? Perhaps these are the other 6 guys. Okay, we don't know what else happened, but these are the other 6 guys. You see, he's already got 10. Why are you giving him an 11th? Okay. He replied, verse 26, he replied, I tell you that to everyone who has, the more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, which in this case is the servant, the one mina guy, even when they have will be taken away. But those enemies of mine, now this is the final conclusion of the story. Remember we talked about the delegation that went after him? But those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and kill them in front of me. Okay, this is not a nice guy. Okay, so this story is told by Jesus to people to manage their expectations about what's going to happen as far as the kingdom goes. So let's think about this. Now, typically, and traditionally, when we have looked at this passage for the last several hundred, certainly thousand of years, there's some clear points that we can draw, conclusions we can draw based on this story. Okay, there is a kingdom. Okay, there's a kingdom at stake, and there's a nobleman who expects to be king. Okay, he has rights to be king. He's heir to the king. Whatever, he expects to be king. Okay, for whatever reason, he thinks he's the guy. Okay, but the kingdom is contested. Okay, But I'm overusing the but here. The kingdom is inevitable. Okay, this guy is going to come. He's going to come back. It doesn't matter what you try. He's going to become the king, whether you like it or not. Okay, so the kingdom is inevitable. So the perspective of the king, I'm sorry, from the perspective of those on the ground, when the king has left, there are tasks to be done. The king has left tasks to be done, and those tasks are the man who would be king, who will be king, have left tasks to be done. He's given these minas. He's given his $15,000. He said, okay, work on this while I'm gone. Okay, so there's things that he should be doing. Okay, and the king is going to, when the king returns, when the king arrives in an inevitable return, he is going to reward those who worked, those who take one and bring back 10, who take one and bring back 5, and the king will punish those who both fail to work, and that's what the servant who just kept the 1 mina, and those who actively opposed him are going to be punished. Okay. Now, traditionally, when we look at this particular story and we look at this, we think, okay, this is a message to those left behind, that Jesus, who is a nobleman, that the nobleman represents Jesus. Jesus is there in Jerusalem. He's there in Israel. He deserves to be the king. He has rights to be the king. And he's going to go to a far country. Okay. Again, Jesus knows what he's talking about. There's a death, burial, and resurrection. That's a very far country. But someday he's going to come back. Okay. But there are people, mostly the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law, who are actively trying to keep him from getting king. Okay. They want to get rid of him. Okay. They're actively opposing him. Okay. And Jesus is talking to those who are left behind to say, look, when you're left behind, don't be like these guys who are opposing me. I'm leaving you tasks to do them, and when I return. And so what that tells the people that are there with him, that are expecting the kingdom to break out, Jesus is once again suggesting, no, there's a time lapse. There's going to be a gap. There's going to be a period of time, and you need to be working on stuff. You need to be working productively. Don't be that 1 mina guy. Okay, don't be that guy. Okay. Now the key to this interpretation, the key to this is looking at the nobleman and say, is the nobleman a good guy or not? Okay. If you look at this as saying the nobleman is a good guy, which is traditionally how most evangelical scholars have looked at this particular passage, and they've said, yes, the nobleman is a good guy. Okay, the nobleman is king. Even the battle at the end, or the killing them at the end, is just part of the eschatological battle of Armageddon, all that kind of stuff. They're just getting what they deserve. Okay, so that's consistent with the rest of a lot of the end times stuff that the Bible teaches. Okay, and that's pretty much how everyone. But there's another way, and it's a very contemporary way, a more contemporary way to look at this, and that is to look at it, if you're looking at the Bible, and people do this, if you look at the Bible from a different perspective. Okay, so we all, those of us in the West, and I am certainly in the West, in Illinois, we have a certain perspective that we look at the Bible from. But if you're from a different perspective, and what I mean by that is you're from a different country, and a significantly different country. So if you're from Central or South America, or if you're from Africa, those two continents, Central, South America, and or Africa, these are countries that had very negative colonial experiences. Okay, now, I know what you're thinking. The U.S. had a negative colonial experience too. We had a war. We got rid of them. Yeah, okay. It's not quite the same because we got off easy compared to a lot of the colonial experiences that other African and Central and South American countries did. Okay, but if you look at the Bible, if you're looking at the Bible and your experience is of a hated oppressor, you're going to look at this passage differently. Okay, you're going to look at this passage and you're going to look at that nobleman and you're going to say, he is not a good guy. He is not a good guy. He is somebody who exploits and takes what isn't his and runs roughshod over his people, and has no compunction over killing people that don't support him. Okay, this is and the original readers or the original hearers, certainly when they heard that this guy went to get the kingdom just like Herod or just like Herod Archelaus. That's not a good tie-in, because the Jews in Israel don't like the fact that they were ruled by Herod or Herod Archelaus or any of the Herods, Antipater or Pilate or any of these Roman guys that are leading them. They don't like that. Okay, so they would have instantly reacted negatively to that connection to the nobleman, and they would have said the nobleman is a bad guy. Okay, and the people doing the good work are the ones that are opposing him. Okay, that they are that delegation is going, that they're opposing him. Okay, so the other way to look at this, if you're looking at this from a what is often referred to as a post-colonial interpretive framework. Okay, you're looking at this from this colonial or a liberation theology viewpoint. Okay, you would say, well, the nobleman is an exploiter. He's an exploiter, and we need to resist exploiters. Okay, so those who opposed him are doing the good work. Okay, and the other servants are exploiters as well. Okay, again, a 1,000% return. How do you get a 1,000% return? Well, the way you get a 1,000% return is, one, you are outrageously lucky on the stock market or the roulette wheel, neither of which were really active at this point, or you are very exploitive in your money lending. Okay, so again, somebody who if you check out some of these, like now, even today, there are loan operations, these payday loan operations and title loan companies and things like that charge outrageous interest rates. I mean, outrageous, 100%, 100% a year or more than that when it comes right down to it. And then with the fees and the things, and we saw a lot of this after the 2008 financial meltdown, where suddenly people were starting to unpack some of these loans. Okay, so the only way you're going to get, so it's assumed in this context, it's assumed that the only way you're going to get that kind of return is to be just as exploitative as the ruler is. Okay, so the only guy who has the wherewithal to resist is the guy who says, no, I am not going to do this. He gets his mina and he says, listen, I am not going to do this to my fellow man. So the hero of the story from this perspective are both the ones who opposed the delegation that went, and the guy who is not using his mina, okay, that put it in the ground, that he's like saying, listen, I'm going to just make sure I may not be able to hurt him, but I may not be able to hurt him, but I'm certainly not going to help him. And I think the message, if you're looking at it for continuing, so what is the message to the original readers? If you look at it from this particular context, you would say, well, be careful of what kingdom you desire. Okay, kingdoms come and kingdoms go. Okay, and your resistance to you need to resist oppression, and your resistance to oppression may cost you. It's going to cost you, like with the one mina guy. He lost the mina, and he's pretty much lost all of his income, and then of course everyone else is killed. Okay, so again, just a different way of looking at the same thing. Okay, again, I'm not buying it. I just think it's interesting to kind of see how, if you look from a different perspective, and see when you look at this particular passage, that's how. Okay, I don't know, because I find a hard time to making a hero out of the guy with the one mina, because again, he's is his life really better? Is anybody's life really better? Has he really accomplished anything? But again, people, again, there are quite a few, very modern. Again, this is a very much a 20th, 21st century interpretation of this particular thing. So, thought I would share that little thing with you, okay? All right, verse 28. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. Okay, now he's going from Jericho to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is on a hill, so you're always going up to Jerusalem. Okay, when in the story of the Good Samaritan, the man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay, as he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you untying it? Say, the Lord needs it. Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, why are you untying the colt? They replied, the Lord needs it. Okay. Now, this is the same thing with, same idea, same question that we were talking with Zaccheus. How does Jesus know it's Zaccheus? How does Jesus know that this is going to work like this? Well, in Luke chapter 10, now again, it could be miraculous, and that's fine. Could be miraculous. But we know in Luke chapter 10, there's an example where Jesus sent people out in advance to set things up. So it's entirely conceivable that Jesus had this set up ahead of time. It's entirely conceivable that one of the people in his crowd is the actual owner there. Okay, so these are all possibilities that it could have been done ahead of time. It could have been set up ahead of time. And I think it was set up ahead of time because Jesus is doing something, I think, very deliberate here. Okay, he's doing something very deliberate. And he needed to make sure it was perfect. And so in order to do that, you would want to set this up ahead of time. Okay? So, verse 35. They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. Okay? So now, the people who went and got the colt, the disciples who went and got it, bring it back. They put their coats on the back of the colt, and Jesus sits on the colt. And then he's going to enter Jerusalem. Okay? Now this is very, again, this is a very intentional, and I hate to call it this, but it's basically a publicity stunt. Okay? And I don't mean that in any kind of pejorative way. But Jesus is clearly looking at a passage in Zechariah, thinking of a passage in I'm going to find just Zechariah here. Zechariah chapter 9, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah. Zechariah 9, I believe it is. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay? So I think Jesus is very clearly making that visual picture. Okay? He wants everybody to know that he entered Jerusalem on a donkey. Okay? On a colt. Okay? And I think he's making a very clear point. And of course, this is just exciting to people because they're thinking, yeah, he is going to become the king. Okay? He is going to become the king. Now, Jesus knows that it's not going to work, but he needs this message to get out to those in Jerusalem, both the crowds that are there for the Passover, as well as the chief priests, the elders, teachers of the law, Pharisees, anyone else who cares to listen. Okay? So very clearly, and the people who are, as he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. Now, the ones who are spreading their cloaks on the road, these are the people that are traveling with him, I think. Okay, they recognize that something is going on, and so they put their cloaks in front of for the colt to walk on. Okay, so that's the people. So it isn't. I don't think it's the people in Jerusalem itself. I mean, there might have been some, but it's the crowds that have been traveling around him. They realize, oh yeah, this is a big thing, and everybody gets it. Everybody understands what's going on, so they're all excited, right? And they start saying, blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Now this is interesting because if you remember back to Luke chapter 13, Luke 13, 35, Jesus is after talking about, let's see, what was the big thing here? He healed a crippled woman on the Sabbath, mustard seed story, narrow door, and then he's lamenting over Jerusalem. And then at the end of the passage, he says, look, your house is left to you desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He's telling you, you're not going to see me until this is what they say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And the only difference between that and this phrase is he as opposed to the king. Okay, and I think that's very deliberate that this change is made. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Now, another interesting point here, this is a side note, verse 38, blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. This is from Psalm 18, okay? So Psalm 118. And if you go back to Psalm 118, verse 26, again, this is just a side note. Psalm 118, verse 26, It says, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. From the house of the Lord we bless you." Okay, but that verse is the culmination of the 3 or 4 verses prior. Okay, the stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Okay, so capstone being the most important stone in an arch or in a building, and the builders didn't understand the right one, but the stone that they rejected is actually the best one. So so now suddenly at that day where that capstone, that rejected stone is exalted to the point of the capstone, it says, "The Lord has done this, and is marvelous in our eyes. The Lord has done it this very day. Let us rejoice and be glad." Okay, so that verse, Psalm 118:24, it sounds a little different in the NIV, but this is in the King James. "This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Okay, so I said all that and then of course, "Lord save us, grant us success. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." That's Psalm 118:26. So that "this is the day which the Lord has made" is referring to a very specific day. Okay, not just any day. Now, we should always be thankful on our days, but this particular text is referring to a very specific day, the day that the rejected capstone becomes the capstone. Okay, that's free. Verse 39. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." Rebuke your disciples. I've noticed this time, lately going through here, the number of times the word rebuke is used in Luke, and maybe one of these days it's another one of those kind of things you could follow through. Rebuke is what Jesus does to the wind. Rebuke is what he tells James and John when they want to bring fire down on heaven, fire down on the Samaritans for not helping them. And here the Pharisees have said, "Hey, you got to really put the kibosh on this." Okay, now why are they saying that? We don't know. Okay, maybe they disagree. Maybe they think it's wrong. Maybe they recognize that this is not going to have a good end. We don't know. But Jesus replies, "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." Okay, that this has to be said. This is going to happen whether you guys like it or not. I mean, think back to what John the Baptist said. Don't say, out of these stones I can raise up, I can raise up a people. As he approached Jerusalem, verse 41, and saw the city, he wept over it. Again, similar as previously when we talked about. "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Okay, and I think that this has already happened. Okay, now again, I've mentioned it before that my opinion is that once John the Baptist is killed, once the messenger is killed, then the die is cast. Okay, so when it says in the middle of verse 42, "but now it is hidden from your eyes," there's no going back. Okay, Jesus knows at this point that there is no going back, that he is not going to get out of this alive. Okay, at least not for 3 days. Okay, so he knows that's what's going to happen. And then this is just kind of typical, not typical, but sort of this eschatological, this end time sort of stuff. This is what's going to happen ultimately, and it's going to happen in 70 AD when Titus comes in and basically dismantles the temple. So he comes in on the colt. He goes to the temple. When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is there's two things about this. One is there's two references. The Synoptic Gospels all say that Jesus cleaned the temple, did this in the temple, right at this point, at the end of his ministry, as he comes into Jerusalem for the Passion Week. John talks about doing it at the beginning of his ministry. Okay, and this has caused no end of fuss in the Bible scholar universe to say, okay, did he happen at the start? Did he happen at the beginning? Did John move the time? Okay, now that is possible. Okay, again, these books are not written in the same. The Gospels are not written in the same with the same rules that a biography or history would be written today. Okay, it's a little bit different. Okay, they're more thematic. They're more to put a point as opposed to trying to give you the exhaustive information. Okay, and to a certain extent, all biographies are to prove a point too, but that's beside the point. Okay, but or it could be that Jesus did it twice. Okay, and the point that he is making here is not that what is being done is wrong, because there is a certain service that's being accomplished by these changers, these exchangers, these people who sell doves and all that kind of stuff. Okay, there is a certain service that is being done here. But to Jesus, something about this, and I don't know the details here, but something about this has changed the nature, the fundamental nature of the temple. So the temple should be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. Okay, that doesn't mean a den of thieves is not where thievery takes place. Okay, it could, but when you call someone a den of thieves, a den is somewhere where people go to relax. Okay, so whereas it should be a place of prayer, the temple should be a place of prayer. It should be a place that draws people's attention to God, that draws people's attention to their own sinfulness. It's actually a place where sinners, like thieves, feel comfortable, feel right at home, feel safe. Okay, and not in a sense of a come as you are. We trust everybody. It's just, hey, I don't need to make any changes here. Okay, and I think something about that equates to Jesus. Plus, the other thing is, once again, he needs to make sure everybody knows he's there. Okay, that makes me think he's done it a second time. Okay, which is to say, here he comes in, he's done it. Oh, it's this guy again. Okay, see the point I'm making here. Verse 47, and I'll finish with this. Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Okay, they weren't like taking pot shots at him or something like that. They were trying to figure out a plan. Okay, but they could not find a way to do it, because all the people hung on his words. Okay, now again, he's just come in with a huge crowd, with a huge crowd of people. He's come in, and if not overtly, certainly tacitly, or maybe covertly isn't quite the right word, but passively claiming to be the king. He's just made this broad statement about what the temple has become and criticized the temple. Okay, so he has certainly got a lot of people's attention. There's a lot of people that are already following him. And again, whenever he's speaking, he's already got his original crowd, and then, crowds attract crowds. And so you've got all these people are hanging on all of the different things that he has to say. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, we'll start to find out next week when we talk about chapter 20, where we have Jesus talking about his authority and paying taxes to Caesar and all that good stuff. So, all right, thank you very much. I hope the weather cools down a little bit, but until then, I will see you next week.